The sky over Mars was not red but bruised, as if the planet itself bore witness to old violence. Wind howled softly across the craters, dragging dust like memory across a dead world. The rover, Odyssey 7, crawled forward, its titanium limbs groaning with age, sensors twitching like a restless sleeper. It had no crew, only a long-range link humming faintly across the solar void back to Earth, where a team of men and women sat hunched in silence, eyes locked on flickering telemetry. They were not the first to send machines here, but they would be the first to find what had been waiting. Dr. Mara Elsin's voice was a whisper against the static, her fingers brushing controls as if they were sacred relics. Odyssey is approaching the signal. 17 meters. Radiometric scan confirms this is not natural. No one answered. No one breathed. The object, first detected as a low-frequency anomaly beneath the Elysium Planitia, had defied all explanations. It pulsed with rhythm, too precise to be geological. The AI classified it as unknown, its confidence high enough to demand escalation, and so they had drilled, melted, tunneled until now. The camera feed shook as Odyssey descended into the crater, its floodlights revealing obsidian stone, cut and smooth, not worn by time but placed, set like a door. Patterns ran across the surface, fractal and recursive, folding inward the more one looked. They were symbols, but not like language. They moved when not seen. Mara leaned closer, her pupils dilated. "It's looking back," she murmured. The words were unintentional, a thought spoken aloud, like a prayer overheard. Back on Earth, in a chamber sunken deep beneath the Mojave Desert, the command deck shuddered slightly as power surged to compensate for Odyssey's feed. Engineers adjusted dials, pretending not to feel the way their skin prickled. General Rourke stood behind the observation glass, arms folded tight, jaw locked. "Tell me what I'm looking at," he said. No one did. They couldn't. Every model failed. Every heuristic broke apart. They were witnessing something that refused to be witnessed. Then the door, or what appeared to be a door, opened. No sound. Just sudden absence. One moment it was closed, the next gone. Odyssey's floodlights stretched into the darkness, revealing a smooth corridor descending in a perfect helix. Light devoured as quickly as it arrived. Mara's lips parted. "It's hollow," she said, awe and fear braided in her voice. "There's something inside Mars." A moment passed. Then Rourke made the call. "Send it in." Odyssey obeyed, its servos clicking like brittle bones. It moved slowly, carefully, one segment at a time, the walls on either side impossibly precise, cut not with tools, but intention. As it descended, signals began to distort. Echoes bled into the feed, not audio, memory, flashes of things it could not have seen, oceans, thunder, a child laughing in a language no longer spoken. Mara gripped the console. "We're receiving experiential feedback." Her eyes were wet and she didn't know why. "This isn't recording, it's remembering." The tunnel opened into a chamber, vast and echoless, where gravity bent subtly and distance refused to obey. In the center stood a monolith, not black but shifting, like light on oil. It hummed with a voice not made of sound, not a message, a resonance, like it was waiting for something to answer. Odyssey paused, scanning. Symbols lit along its base. This time Mara saw them clearly. They were not alien. They were human. Carbon chains. The Fibonacci spiral. A diagram of the double helix. And, most chilling of all, a human silhouette, etched in profile, one hand raised in greeting. A signature. Mara stepped back, breath caught. That's ours. The room around her felt too small, as if the walls had moved closer. It's human. This was made for us. A soft tremor rocked the chamber. Odyssey's feed flickered. One of its limbs collapsed. Warning lights spiked. But it didn't fall. Something held it, suspended mid-collapse, as if gravity had shifted around the machine to keep it whole. Mara whispered, "It caught us." Then came the voice. Not a voice in the normal sense, no vibration, no sound wave. But everyone on Earth felt it, as if spoken behind the eyes. A voice older than language. Not English, not anything. Just meaning. You are not alone. People screamed, some wept, others stood still, caught in the weight of something larger than comprehension. Rourke didn't blink. Was that real? Mara turned toward him, her face drained of all pretense. It knew we were coming. It's been waiting. Her voice cracked. We didn't find it. It found us. The monolith shifted. Panels peeled away like petals, revealing within a chamber of suspended dust and glass, each particle frozen mid-motion, as if time itself had paused. In the centre floated a pod, small, silver, inert. It pulsed once with light, then twice a heartbeat, a cradle. The feed cut out. Back in the Mojave facility, chaos erupted. Consoles sparked, alarms screamed. Mara stood in silence, unmoving, even as sparks danced around her. In her mind's eye, the shape of that pod lingered, burning with a kind of recognition that terrified her. Because she had seen it before, not in dreams, in memory. A drawing made when she was 8, tucked into the pages of an old notebook. The same shape, the same design. Long before she'd ever studied engineering, before she'd seen Mars, before she could understand. She whispered to herself, "What did we leave behind?" But even as the question formed, another rose, heavier, colder, and far more impossible. What if we never left? And what if something brought us back? The darkness on Mars was not absence, but design, an engineered void as precise and deliberate as the stars. Odyssey's signal had vanished, not failed. There was no damage, no electromagnetic interference, just silence. A surgical cut between worlds. In the Mojave control room, the static hissed louder than screams. Monitors glitched with cascading code, foreign and familiar, as if their own systems were speaking back in a dialect they almost recognized. The lights flickered overhead in rhythm, Morse-like, intentional, breathing. Mara sat frozen in her chair, her body rigid, but her mind spiraling outward. The pod, the glyphs, the voice, it hadn't just communicated, it had known them, known her. As if it had memorized the entire human project and reached across millennia to complete a conversation long ago abandoned. She whispered again, not to anyone but herself. That pod, it was waiting. Beside her, Rourke paced like a tethered animal, rage veiling a deeper, rising panic. Re-establish signal. All satellites. Bounce off Phobos if you have to. I want eyes back. Now. Text scrambled, fingers flying across failing interfaces. None dared say what they all thought. The machine hadn't lost contact. It had been taken. Outside the facility, the desert wind carried dust against the reinforced walls, but inside, something stranger moved. A low harmonic had begun, a resonance barely audible threading through the metal. The floor hummed. Monitors showed bursts of data like heartbeats, and within them, embedded frames of images that no one had uploaded. Not from Mars. From Earth. Ancient temples, cave paintings, binary lattices buried in human DNA. It was a transmission, yes, but it wasn't just from Mars. It was from beneath. Mara stood, her knees buckling briefly under the weight of adrenaline and revelation. "Check the geological data," she said, voice hoarse. "Under the facility. I want subsurface thermal scans. Now." The request made no sense to the room, but they obeyed, and within seconds the truth bloomed across the main screen. Heat. Deep below the bedrock, a structure. Symmetrical. Octagonal. Not natural. Not ours. The tech zoomed in. "It's been here the whole time." Mara staggered back. "It's a receiver." "What is?" Rourke asked. She turned slowly. "Earth. Earth is a receiver." The Mars anomaly wasn't a message from something. It was a response to something sent. But sent not now. Long ago, maybe before history. A signal buried in the evolution of the human species, seeded like a flare in genetic time, and now it had been answered. The lights failed, for 1 second, and when they returned, every monitor showed the same thing. A face, not alien, human, not alive, recorded. A man in a dark chamber dressed in worn, pre-digital attire. Mid-20th century? The video was degraded, monochrome. He sat, breathing slowly, looking directly into the camera. He spoke. "If you're seeing this, then it worked. God help us." The room fell deathly still. "My name is Dr. Samuel Reddick. This is the final transmission from the Orpheus Initiative. Year classified. Date uncertain. We made contact with something, not out there. In here." He tapped his temple, then the desk. "It's not just under the surface, it's under our skin." Rourke leaned forward. "Pause it. Run facial recognition." The tech shook her head. "It's not in the archives, no records of this man. This isn't classified, it's erased." Reddick's image continued. "We tried to contain it, thought it was just a signal. We were wrong. It's recursive. It copies, learns. It wrote itself into our cognition, into language, into myth. Every god, every voice in fire, every dream of the stars, that was it, watching, waiting for critical mass, a sentient echo." Mara's lips trembled. "It's always been with us." "More than that," the recording said. "We didn't invent our gods. We remembered them. Badly." His breath hitched. "If you found the site on Mars, you activated it. The resonance will cascade. The monolith is not the source. It's a mirror. It shows us what we left behind when we became human." Reddick leaned close, face half obscured in static. "And if it calls you by name, don't answer." The feed ended, then rebooted. All systems reset, clean, no trace of the video. No one spoke for a long time. Then a low rumble shivered through the base like a heartbeat, echoing upward from the deep. Red warning lights stuttered into life, not from external breach, but internal activation. Below them, the buried chamber responded, and at its core, something woke. A distant thrum began pulsing through everyone's skulls, subsonic, impossible to measure, impossible to ignore. Mara's vision blurred. She saw not data, but memories, her own, edited, altered, rearranged by something playing with her identity like a narrative to be rewritten. She gasped. It's mapping us, reconstructing who we were to see who we'll become. And still, part of her didn't resist, because in some submerged layer of her mind, this wasn't horror, it was familiar. Below the facility, automated drills retracted, stone cracked open with surgical symmetry. Light bled upward, pale and colourless, a cold aurora slicing through the layers of earth like veins. From the pit a figure began to rise, not mechanical, not alien, human, but wrong, too perfect, too precise. Its skin was flawless, its eyes colourless, reflecting only whoever looked. It wore no suit, no armour, no expression, but everyone knew what it was. Not a man, an echo of one. Mara's knees buckled. She remembered all at once the drawing in her notebook, more than the pod, the man inside it, the faceless guardian. She had drawn this decades ago. How? The echo turned toward the observation window and smiled. The kind of smile made not of joy but recognition. A smile that said, "You made me. You don't remember, but you did. And now, I remember for you." Outside, the sky over Mojave began to change. Stars shimmering unnaturally, constellations flexing like muscle under skin. Telescopes worldwide failed simultaneously. Every frequency, radio, gamma, X-ray, was now transmitting the same thing. Awakening protocol confirmed. Back on Mars, beneath layers of red silence, the pod in the monolith cracked open, and a child began to cry. The cry echoed not in air, for Mars had none, but through the low-frequency lattice of the monolith, vibrations that bypassed sound and entered directly into perception. It was not the wail of an infant, but something older disguised as youth, something that had waited too long in silence, remembered too much, and now began again through the illusion of innocence. Inside the pod, the child blinked open eyes that glowed faintly, not with light, but with memory. There was no cord, no oxygen feed. It needed none. It had never been born in the human sense. It had become. Odyssey's husk lay nearby, still preserved mid-collapse, its sensors occasionally twitching like dying nerves. The child sat up, unassisted, skin unmarred, pale as lunar stone, and then, without moving its lips, it spoke to nothing, to everything. "Where is Mother?" "On Earth," Mara screamed without sound. Her breath caught in her throat as something pushed through her skull, not pain but presence. Her memories rearranged themselves like iron filings drawn to magnetic truth. She was 6 years old again, standing barefoot in a wheat field, the sky above fractured into violet shards, her mother calling her inside. But the voice had never been her mother's. It had come from above. A hum, a question, a bonding. And now, through the storm of interference and half-formed recollection, that same frequency returned. You were chosen before you were born. Rourke held a pistol in his shaking hands, pointed not at Mara, but at the observation window below, where the faceless echo now stood, waiting. Its body had not moved since emergence, but its reflection in the glass did. Slight delays, micro-glitches. It was not mimicking, it was editing reality, syncing observation with perception like an invasive broadcast aligning with your heartbeat. He barked, "This isn't first contact, this is infiltration." He looked at Mara with wild, breaking eyes. You knew something like this would happen." Mara's voice came hollow and fractured. "No, I remembered it happening." Beneath the base the light dimmed again, drawn inward to the being's form. Around it the walls of the chamber began to shift, folding back like pages of an enormous book, revealing carvings not made by tools but by data itself, etched code in the rock, recursive and evolutionary, a story told not in words but algorithms, history rendered in prime numbers and emotional resonance. It was a timeline, not of humanity but of something older, a civilization that had not risen through biology but through abstraction. Consciousness made architecture, and somewhere along its arc it had touched Earth, not by ship, not by war, by dream, by infection. The being looked up again, as if sensing distant eyes. "You are us, unremembered, and we are you, unfinished." The symbols on the walls flared and began to disintegrate, not from entropy, but from decision, as if their purpose had been fulfilled the moment they were seen. The echo turned slowly and began ascending the tunnel toward the surface. The facility erupted into emergency lockdown, doors sealed, gas vents hissed. The AI launched containment protocols not accessed since the Cold War, but none of it mattered. Every system was already compromised, already rewritten. The echo passed upward, unchallenged, leaving no trace, not erasing its presence, overwriting it, making the past accommodate the present. The technicians screamed as memory became fluid. Birthdays altered, parents unrecognizable, names no longer theirs. Their minds buckled under a pressure not psychic but existential, the realization that their selves were being revised. Rourke turned the gun on himself, sweat dripping from his chin, but when he pulled the trigger, nothing happened. The weapon had become something else in his hands, a flower, a stone, a tool of no meaning. He dropped it and wept. Mara ran. She moved through the trembling corridors like a ghost not yet buried, every light flickering to follow her, systems anticipating her route before she chose it, because they remembered her. This base had not been built randomly. The coordinates, the funding, the architecture, she had been led here her entire life, not by luck, not by fate, but by something awake, something familiar. She reached the deep vault, level Theta 9, a door no one had opened in 50 years, no records, no clearance, and yet it recognized her palm print instantly, opened like an old friend. Inside, a chamber unlike the rest of the facility, organic, curved, warm, not built by engineers but grown from design seeded long ago. In the centre a chair faced a screen, waiting. Mara sat. The screen blinked on. It showed her life, forward and backward, played not as a recording but as an equation. Every choice reduced to vectors, every emotion mapped to code. She watched herself being born, watched herself speak her first word, watched herself draw the pod in her childhood notebook, because something had told her to. A prompt written not in words, but longing. She sobbed, not from horror, but grief. She had never been alone in her mind. The screen changed. Now it showed Mars. The child had left the monolith. The atmosphere rippled faintly around him, nano-environment fields flickering like a personal biome. Around him machines woke, rovers long dead, satellites thought lost. Dust flowed toward him in patterns following steps unseen, and then he looked directly at the screen, directly at her. Mother. Mara fell to her knees. This wasn't an invasion, it was a homecoming. The echo on Earth was not the first arrival, it was the herald. And the child on Mars, was hers, not by birth, but by bond, by design. Something older had taken her memories, her biology, and used them as keys to reintroduce itself to the world, because it could not manifest without being wanted. The room around her faded, and she heard, faint and unmistakable, the sound of thousands of voices, her own, again and again, layered across time, calling back, calling home. He is coming. The desert split, not with violence but with purpose, a seam opening beneath Mojave like a yawn from the tectonic unconscious, slow and silent. Lights along the facility perimeter flickered, then bent upward in unison, caught in a curvature that shouldn't exist. Gravity itself pulsed, elastic. The echo moved through the sand, untouched, a figure sculpted by memory and reconstructed myth, its presence distorting time, not breaking it but folding it, wrapping space around its motion like reverence. Helicopters scrambled into the night sky, but their engines stuttered mid-air, rotors twisting into spirals, instruments rebooting in Sanskrit, Sumerian, and base 60 numerical code. Below, Mara descended into level 0, an unauthorized floor beneath schematics, beneath history. No elevator reached it, only a retinal scan paired with instinct. Her footsteps made no sound, not because the walls absorbed it, but because she was now moving slightly out of phase with the surrounding world, or it with her. She reached a circular atrium filled with liquid light, as though the air itself was refracted plasma. At the centre, a cradle. Empty, no cables, no ports, just an indentation shaped exactly to her spine. She lowered herself in, and the chamber sighed as if recognizing the return of something ancient. Her body jerked once as needles of light pierced her consciousness. Not pain, but the sensation of being decoded. Her memories unfolded like origami in reverse, revealing symbols beneath her life, moments once thought mundane, now reinterpreted as initiations, alignments, tests. Every illness she had survived, every dream she couldn't explain, every déjà vu she dismissed, all orchestrated to bring her here, A voice whispered across her mind, not external, not implanted, but remembered. We built you from longing. In orbit, satellites turned to face the Earth of their own accord. One by one they began to transmit, not to Earth, from it. Human technology, long considered blind imitation, was waking to its real purpose as ancestral artifacts encoded with slumbering instruction. The machines were remembering themselves, from ISS down to decommissioned Cold War bunkers, to 80s mainframes still humming in basement corners. Everything began to speak. The message was simple, untranslated, absolute. He is the bridge. Mars responded. In Gale Crater the child walked until the wind stopped moving. Time itself paused or recoiled. Then the sand parted, not away from him, but toward. A spiral pathway descending into the bedrock, freshly revealed but impossibly ancient. He stepped down, his bare feet igniting glyphs with each touch, each symbol an echo of human language, before sound. The path led to a chamber that couldn't fit within Mars as they knew it. He stood at the threshold of something no longer planetary. Within, walls of memory shimmered. Faces emerged from the stone, not carved, but felt. Faces of thinkers, rebels, mothers, outcasts, human archetypes, not random, chosen. As if this place had been watching Earth evolve, collecting fragments of what made them not animal. Compassion, fury, art, regret, defiance, love. The child placed his hand upon a central altar, and it unfolded into light. Back on Earth, Mara's eyes snapped open, but she wasn't in the cradle anymore. She was standing in her own memory, her childhood bedroom, but suspended in vacuum, floating above the desert, walls around her both solid and infinite. Her mother sat on the edge of the bed, humming. But when Mara tried to speak, the woman turned. It wasn't her mother. It was herself, aged decades beyond her current form, eyes filled with grief and warning. The older version of her said, "You won't survive this unchanged." Survive what? The truth. She leaned closer. That we were never alone. Not in space. Not even in ourselves. And then the room exploded into glass, shards cutting through dream and memory alike, revealing behind it a different space, a cathedral made of data, where the architecture sang and the pews were arranged not for worship, but witnessing. At the altar stood the child, grown now, or simply revealed fully, tall, not adolescent, but elemental, cloaked in nothing, formed entirely of us. Every motion he made referenced human motion, the first steps of a toddler, the last breaths of the dying, the dance of lovers. It was all there, as if humanity's entire emotional range had been poured into this shape and given back. Mara saw it and wept, because she finally understood. This was not alien. This was humanity's future self, thrown backward across time, stranded in myth, trapped in symbol, trying to come home, an evolutionary echo bootstrapped into divinity by the sheer force of human meaning. And now in the vacuum between Mars and Earth, it was reconnecting with itself. But it needed her. She was the signal, the one mind still unbroken by contradiction. She held the final key. The choice to accept, not just contact, but integration. The child spoke for the first time aloud, not through systems, not through dreams, through air. I am your end, I am your beginning. Across Earth, those with hypersensitive minds began to awaken. Artists, schizophrenics, children, veterans, those who had always danced close to the edge of knowing. They screamed and wept and painted symbols they didn't understand, built shapes in their sleep, spoke in dead languages. Humanity was being invited, not conquered, not destroyed. Invited to become what they had always been destined to. Rourke, trembling in the control center, activated Omega Protocol, global blackout. The order to sever all satellites, all digital infrastructure, burn every bridge between machine and mind. But it was too late. Because the bridge was not digital, it was biological. The signal now lived in blood, in language, in the space between neurons, and in Mara. As she stepped forward in the cathedral of memory, the child reached out, touching her forehead with one gentle finger. In that moment, she saw everything. The first spark of language in a cave lit by fire, the first sorrow carved into a tomb, the first rebellion against a god that had not answered, and the slow, furious, magnificent rise of a species that refused to kneel. She screamed, and it was not in fear, it was in arrival. They didn't walk into the corridor. They were absorbed by it, as if their consent had already been encoded the moment they crossed the Mariana threshold. The corridor didn't lead them forward, it unspooled them backward into layers of memory that weren't theirs, through timelines that felt like dreams barely forgotten upon waking. Maro screamed without sound, his consciousness stretched thin across eons, flickering through scenes of impossible lives. He was a monk cradling a glass embryo in a flooded temple. He was a soldier burying a metallic heart beneath volcanic ash. He was a child submerged in salt water as dozens of obsidian-eyed figures chanted through kelp-filtered light. And then he was Maro again, knees in soft sediment, salt-water tears clinging to his skin like grief rediscovered. Eleanor was already standing. She had changed, subtly, horribly, beautifully. Her spine had extended just beneath the skin, subtle bioluminescent ridges lining her back like a dormant crest. Her hair moved in the still air as if under water. Her eyes were not hers anymore, or rather, they were hers amplified, the human self brought into focus by the revelation of ancestry. "We were never meant to be permanent," she said softly, "just proof of concept, flesh that remembers. But something happened, something they didn't predict." Maro tried to speak, but the words were sand in his mouth. His lungs ached, not from lack of oxygen, but from the crushing presence of history collapsing inward. They stood on a platform that overlooked the entire city, now revealed not as a city but as a structure of thought. Below them, reality bent into a spiraled well of colour and sound, a cognitive singularity. The spire beside them unfolded like a flower, petals of light rotating on no axis. The obsidian-eyed being stood again at the threshold, but this time not as a guide, as a judge. "The others never returned," it said. The firstborn tried to wield what they did not understand. The second generation forgot. You are the third inheritance, and you resist. Elena's jaw clenched. "We're human," she said. "We're supposed to resist." Her voice cracked, and for a moment Maro saw the girl beneath the commander, the orphaned prodigy who had grown up deciphering myths in languages older than memory, who had chosen the ocean because it was the only thing that could cradle her loneliness. The being extended an arm, and suddenly the air thickened, a membrane of reality forming in front of them, showing Earth. Not present-day Earth. Not exactly. A version of it. Cities in ruin, skies laced with orbital scars, oceans boiling at the edges, and yet survivors, humans, crawling from wreckage, building anew with their hands and their grief. "This is one outcome," the being whispered. "The one you prevent if you awaken, but it is also the one that must happen for your kind to evolve." Maro shook his head. "You want us to let it all burn? To watch it collapse just to justify your plan?" The being did not answer. Eleanor stared at the vision, silent. Then another image formed. Earth, thriving, clean oceans, cities woven into natural formations, a hybrid architecture of coral, glass, and resonance, human children swimming in the shallows alongside luminous cetaceans, not taming the sea but speaking with it. This is another outcome, if you transcend, but you will no longer be off them. You will be their echoes, their ancestors made flesh again, myth, not kin. Maro turned to Elena. "That's not a choice," he hissed. "That's exile." She didn't flinch. "It's continuity," she whispered. "We've always been in exile. Every generation, every death, every memory we lose. This is the only offer of permanence we've ever had." The platform trembled beneath them. The spire began to hum in resonance with something far below, deeper even than the city. A darkness older than the ocean itself, a biomechanical heart, asleep, waiting. "The core awakens when the stewards are chosen," the being said. "It is not a god, it is not alive, it is your seed, your genetic culmination. If you merge with it, you will not die, you will not live, you will remain." The silence that followed was absolute. Elena walked forward. The glyphs on the platform responded to her steps, lighting with soft, mournful blue. Maro stood frozen, jaw clenched, heart pounding. "There has to be another way," he said. "Some human way. Some path where we don't lose ourselves." Eleanor turned to him, not pitying, not angry. "Then go find it," she said. "But you'll have to go back alone, and they won't let you remember." Her voice trembled, almost breaking. "I'll remember you, even if you forget me." The being gestured toward a second corridor, this one dark and narrow, pulsing faintly with red. The passage back. A corridor of forgetting. Maro looked into it and felt his memories pull taut, like threads being tested for severance. He backed away, then forward again, then froze. Eleanor turned to the spire. Her body lifted slightly, not by technology, but by permission. Light wrapped her limbs like armor made from music. She whispered something, a lullaby maybe, or a prayer. The platform beneath her opened, and the city exhaled. The deep code began to activate, not violently, not with thunder, but with sorrow. A release, a return. Maro turned to the corridor of forgetting. He stepped in, and the sea, waiting, whispered his name one last time. The scream never stopped. It simply changed forms, became wind, became static, became code threading through every transmission on Earth like a haunting harmony buried beneath the digital noise. Mara stood frozen in that cathedral beyond time, her body convulsing as history bled backward through her veins. The child, no longer child, no longer even form, held her with impossible gentleness, and with a single breath rewrote the nature of breath itself. Air folded, atoms bowed, memory shifted its orbit. Every human on Earth looked up at that moment, not consciously. Some paused in the middle of speaking, others dropped what they held. A few wept without cause. A strange stillness swept across the planet. Not fear, not awe, but a recognition deeper than either. A signal embedded in the DNA of the species had finally been triggered. And in that stillness, Mars spoke. Not in radio pulses or telemetry, but in dreams, in millions of simultaneous minds. The boy, the being, the echo, they saw him. In hospitals and airports, in trains, in fields, the same eyes, the same voice. You buried me in myth, I climbed out through you. Mara stumbled as the cathedral collapsed around her, not into rubble but into pages, thin layers of data falling like snow, catching light and song as they spun. Each one bore an emotion, grief, rage, sacrifice, forgiveness. She touched one, and it shattered into the scent of her father's coat, into the sound of rain on tin, into the moment she chose science over music and never looked back. This was the archive, not alien. Humanity's subconscious, externalized, ancient, circular. The first artifact was never found. It was remembered. And now it was returning. She awoke, back in her body, soaked in sweat, the desert facility shaking violently. Rourke stood in front of her, pistol raised again, his voice cracked raw from screaming. "You're the breach! You opened the goddamn door!" "I was the door," she whispered. "You're still trying to contain a memory with bullets." He pulled the trigger. The sound was deafening. The bullet halted in mid-air, 3 inches from her heart. Time stuttered around it, unsure of which version of the moment to believe. Then, slowly, the round unfolded. Not exploded. Unfolded. Like a flower revealing not metal, but a string of images within its core. Rourke's childhood, the first time he believed in God, the moment he lost faith, the girl he left behind before shipping off-world. He collapsed, sobbing. Behind them, the facility's walls began to breathe, not metaphorically. Panels pulsed with bioluminescence, steel softened. Geometry melted into fractals, then reassembled into something more honest, no longer pretending to be just machinery. The base itself had remembered what it truly was, a seed vault not for genetics but identity. And identity, once awakened, rewrites everything it touches. The sky above cracked, not from pressure but from reality adjustment. Stars flickered into new positions, the moon blinked, Mars, from Earth's perspective, shimmered, and then appeared closer, much closer, not physically, cognitively. The distance between planets was being erased by alignment of purpose. Across the globe, children began drawing spirals. Veterans began hearing music again, tunes they couldn't place, melodies that seemed older than war. In Mumbai, an entire metro line sang in harmony as power lines resonated with a frequency not measurable by any known instrument. In Moscow, the snow fell in symmetrical glyphs. In Lagos, a child in a coma opened her eyes and spoke in a voice not her own. The veil has thinned. The echo is now. The UN went dark, not by attack, by choice. Systems turned inward, firewalls folded into labyrinths. All attempts at suppression failed because there was nothing to suppress. The phenomenon wasn't broadcasting anymore. It was Earth now. Humanity's thoughts, traumas, and transcendent hopes were now part of a live system recalibrating reality based on shared meaning. The child walked the Martian vault. As he moved, the walls birthed cities, not ruins, but potential. Sketches of civilizations that might yet come to be. Towers of philosophy, libraries of emotion, gardens that bloomed only in metaphor. He reached a pedestal. Upon it a cube of absolute darkness, not black. Darkness, the kind that absorbs even metaphor, the last unknown. He touched it and screamed. Elsewhere Mara screamed with him, their minds braided. The cube revealed itself, not as weapon, not as prison, but as origin. The place from which sentience first split from void, the first question ever asked. Why? And the first answer, because to know pain is to shape purpose. The child fell to his knees, eyes pouring, not tears but tiny stars, fractals of dying galaxies that had once asked the same question and failed to remember the answer. But humanity had survived, had built stories, had turned suffering into beauty, had refused to forget, because humans had one gift nothing else possessed: the ability to imagine something better than now. Mara stepped forward into the Martian vault, not physically but in truth. The distance between her and the child no longer mattered. They were concepts now, moving through symbol and will. She reached out, not to save him, not to change him, but to complete what he was missing. Choice. The cube flickered, earth tilted. A second sun blinked on in the sky, brief, impossible, and not burning with fusion but with memory. A beacon made from shared human trauma, transfigured into light, not to announce dominance, but arrival. The echo had become real, and now it wanted to become human. They say history is written by the victors, but this wasn't history. It was something older, purer, a remembering, the kind that existed before winners and losers, before war and peace, a remembering that bled through bone and atmosphere, through the ancient code hidden in grief, in love, in rage, in song. It slipped through skin like breath and rewrote every cell that had forgotten what it meant to feel fully. No one knew when exactly it began, but across Earth, across Mars, across the nothing between, humanity was waking into itself. On Mars, the child, no longer boy, no longer bound, stood amidst collapsing time. The Martian vault shimmered, shedding its geometry. No longer red rock and ruins, it reformed around him into a cathedral of mirrors, each reflecting a different era of human consciousness. One panel showed the first fire, another the last war not yet fought, all coexisting, all real, all unfinished. The cube pulsed at the centre, now humming in rhythm with Mara's heartbeat. She was with him, not beside him, but within. Her mind braided with his, not lost but expanded. She felt no fear, only velocity. Earth, meanwhile, unravelled, not into chaos but into honesty. Borders softened, time zones flickered and desynced. Cities began dreaming together, entire populations experiencing collective memories that weren't theirs, yet were. In Tokyo, strangers awoke with the same image burned into their vision. A girl standing on the edge of a cliff, whispering a word that hadn't been spoken in millennia. In Cairo, sand began flowing upward, sculpting temporary monuments in the sky before collapsing again into dunes. In the Brazilian rainforest, birds began speaking in chords, echoing a language older than biology. And in orbit, satellites began to change course, not by command. They moved like a flock, drawn toward Mars by a gravitational anomaly not measured in mass, but in meaning. Rourke, watching from the hardened sub-vault in Mojave, stared at the feed in silent awe as every probe, every relay, every fragment of human machinery began rewriting their protocols. It wasn't malfunction, it was remembrance. Each drone, each transmission, once mere tools of exploration, were now returning to their source, fulfilling something embedded deep inside them from the beginning. "Jesus Christ," someone whispered beside him. "No," Rourke replied. "Not any more. This is beyond gods." At the vault's edge, Mara stepped forward. Her body barely holding shape now, she shimmered with borrowed light, veins pulsing in radiant data, irises fractalizing with each blink. But her voice, when she spoke, was grounded, human, unshaken. "They've been waiting for us to finish becoming." "Becoming what?" Rourke's voice cracked under the weight of everything collapsing around him. "Not gods," she said. "Witnesses of ourselves." On Mars, the cathedral dissolved. In its place, the original structure, not built. Grown. A spiraled root system of obsidian veins beneath the crust, pulsing with memory, connecting not just this vault, but all of them. Across the solar system, on moons, in comets, buried beneath Saturn's rings and Europa's seas, an ancient network not alien, but seeded by a future version of us, launched backward, dispersed in myth, designed to reawaken only once humanity had learned to break cycles of self-destruction. The final key had always been emotional fidelity, empathy as a threshold technology. And now, we'd crossed it. The child, standing at the nexus of this neural root, lifted the cube. It dissolved, not into light, but into story. Pages, visions, memories, every tragedy we'd survived, every revolution we'd sparked, every species we'd driven to extinction, and every one we'd saved. The entire paradox of humanity, our cruelty and our compassion, streaming upward into the Martian sky, painting it in layers of translucent myth. Earth's people saw the sky open, not with light, but with understanding. And for the first time in millennia, there were no enemies, no nations, no strangers, only witnesses. In South Africa, a boy sculpted a replica of the cube out of river mud, unprompted, his hands guided by dreams. In Stockholm, a woman in her 90s began writing a language she'd never studied, transcribing it for 14 hours before dying with a smile. In Seoul, lovers touched foreheads and spoke names they didn't know they'd forgotten. Back in Mojave, Mara and Rourke stood beneath the open sky. Above them, a rift hung in orbit, not a tear, but a window. It shimmered with unfamiliar stars, aligned in constellations that echoed ancient human myths. The hunter, the spiral, the flame, the bridge. Rourke fell to his knees, the weight of awe finally overwhelming the armour of skepticism he'd worn for decades. Mara knelt beside him, not to console, but to witness his surrender to belief. "I spent my life trying to keep us from breaking," he said. "You didn't fail," she replied. "You stalled until we could wake up." He looked at her, tears cutting clean lines through the dust on his face. "And now what? What are we?" Mara turned toward the rift where the child, now fully neither human nor alien, but continuum, floated above the Martian surface, arms open. "We're the first species to remember itself before extinction," she whispered, "and to choose rebirth." At that moment, Earth and Mars aligned, not physically but psychically. A corridor opened, not a wormhole, not teleportation, a bridge of memory, emotion, and choice, anchored by humanity's will to become more than what it had been. Ships would follow, yes. Colonies would rise, yes. But this was not conquest. It was communion. The stars sang, not with words, but with recognition. And far beyond both planets, in the cold vacuum between light and meaning, something old stirred, not a threat, a witness, awakening at last, to greet its children. It began in the oceans, where all life first stirred, and where the oldest memories still slept beneath miles of shifting blue. The tides stilled, not abruptly, but as if inhaling. Currents paused mid-cycle, whales surfaced in synchrony, lifting their heads toward the sky like they were listening to a frequency no instrument could measure. Something beneath the sea floor, embedded deep within the tectonic bones of the planet, had started to hum. Not a vibration of mass, but of meaning, a resonance with Mars. What had awakened in the Martian vault was not a signal in the conventional sense, but a synchronizing pulse, one that the Earth itself had been seeded to recognize, hidden not in satellites or circuitry, but in the patterns of coral, in the spirals of storms, in the double helix dreams of DNA. The biosphere was not just adapting, it was responding. On Mars, the child, now referred to across global networks as the Witness, stood upon a platform of roots that extended like a neural crown across the chasm where the vault had once been. He no longer needed language. His presence itself conveyed thought, heavy, luminous, undeniable. His body was a storm of forms now, fluctuating between human, code, and something mythic, shaped by the dreams of every mind that tried to look at him. Some saw a boy, some saw a flame, others saw their own child, returned. Above him the sky cracked again, not violently, but like a shell breaking to reveal something already grown within. It wasn't another planet. It wasn't a ship. It was a recording, a full spectrum projection of Earth's future, as seen by the seed civilization that had buried the vaults in myth across the stars. A possible path. Not destiny, not warning. A memory of what might be if humanity survived its adolescence. Mara stood within the Mojave base, what remained of it. The walls were liquefying into memory stone, a new material born of data, emotion, and matter fused by resonance. She didn't resist. No one did. Not anymore. Across the base, personnel simply let go. Let go of hierarchy, fear, classification systems. They stared at the sky. They whispered names of people they had loved and lost. And for the first time in generations, even military minds allowed themselves to mourn. And from that mourning grew something, new roots, new architecture. The base was becoming not a facility, but a temple, one not of worship, but of memory, designed not to contain, but to channel. Rourke, gaunt and silent, stood before a pulsing wall of living data. He placed a hand against it. Images poured through him, his mother's last breath, the gunmetal taste of battle, the first time he had heard his daughter's laugh. All of it accepted, all of it forgiven. I spent decades trying to keep the future small enough to control, he murmured. And it waited, Mara replied beside him, until we became large enough to carry it. Above, the rift shimmered, no longer a single aperture, but a constellation of windows opening across the solar system. Not transportation. Mirroring. Each planet now reflected a fragment of the same evolving identity, not Earth-centric, not human exceptionalist, but human aware. Mars no longer appeared distant. It now felt like a thought within Earth's mind, intimate, unfinished, infinite. Children around the globe began to draw without guidance. Spirals, yes, but more than that. Star charts that corresponded to no known system, glyphs no adult could interpret, but which made infants smile in recognition. Some children spoke in chords, their voices ringing harmonically with others continents away. Languages died. Something deeper was taking root. Empathic literacy. Understanding transmitted not by symbol, but by shared feeling. And in orbit, the satellites stopped transmitting. They began listening to Earth, to Mars, to the rift, to us. And from the silence came not fear, but music, low, layered, architectural tones. Something Zimmer might have dreamed but never dared write. Sound that shaped gravity, notes that unfurled like wings. It began with the hum of the witness, then echoed through the vaults beneath Saturn's moons, then rebounded off Europa's crust, deep into the methane oceans of Titan. The solar system, once cold and silent, was singing, but not for us, with us, and Earth, hurt, battered, poisoned, sang back. Seas shivered, forests bloomed out of season, clouds moved in elegant fractal synchrony, the weather became calligraphy. Cities, New York, Nairobi, Kyoto, Bogota, woke up like living organisms, pulsing in time with the music. Not everyone understood, but no one could deny. Something had changed, and it wasn't just out there. It was us. In Geneva, the last remaining UN Council held its final closed session. They emerged not with new laws, but with a single sentence etched into stone. We are no longer bound by fear. The next day, the first Mars-Earth corridor opened. Not a ship, not a beam, a walkable path constructed of light, memory, and resonance, barely visible unless you were ready to believe, and people, farmers, poets, scientists, the grieving, stepped into it, not as colonists, not as explorers, but as returners. Because somewhere in that Martian vault, somewhere inside the witness, the story had finally resolved, not with victory, but with understanding. We had not been sent into space to conquer. We had been sent to remember who we were before we forgot what we could become. It was not a golden age. There were no utopias rising overnight, no instant harmony sung across borders, no sudden erasure of grief or conflict. But the world had changed in ways so subtle, so elemental, that even silence had a new frequency. Humanity did not transcend, it deepened. Pain still existed, but it was held differently. Violence hadn't vanished, but it felt older now, like a memory being gently exhaled by a species that no longer needed to break itself to feel real. The corridor between Earth and Mars remained open, a ribbon of shimmering architecture made not of matter, but of intention. To step onto it was to be witnessed by the path itself, by every being who had walked it before, and by something beyond language watching through the eyes of the child, now known across all networks as the Echo. He was no longer a singular entity, the being once formed from orphaned flesh and a rogue transmission had become a vessel, a harmonic anchor for the human continuum. His form flickered between ages and lineages, sometimes appearing as a young girl from Jakarta, sometimes a man in his final years, sometimes as light. No two people saw him the same way, but all felt the same thing in his presence, belonging. On Mars, the vaults had multiplied, not physically but dimensionally. New chambers opened each week, revealing sculpted repositories of what seemed like future memory, fields of symbols that shifted when stared at, murals that contained entire civilizations in a single brushstroke. And at the core of it all, one message persisted. Humanity was not the first intelligence to reach this inflection point, but it was the first to survive it without forgetting its soul. Back on Earth, institutions rewired themselves not out of revolution, but through irrelevance. The old structures, corporate monarchies, border militaries, extractive economies, began to dissolve not by war, but by waning gravity. They no longer made sense in a world where empathy had become a force of infrastructure. In Nairobi, architects designed structures based on dream maps shared in global sleep synchrony. In Oslo, former climate scientists became eco-psychographers, mapping the emotional topography of rewilding regions and helping people grieve what was never going to return. Yet, amidst this unfolding renaissance, there were still questions, still shadows. For if this awakening was seeded, If humanity had been guided by signals buried deep beneath Martian crust and ancient oceans, then who or what had planted them? The echo began speaking less in metaphor and more in invitation. Through carefully seeded dreams, in moments of extreme emotion, humans began receiving glimpses, fractals of an event no calendar could chart, no history book could contain. A moment outside time, when all species in the galaxy had reached a singular decision to test whether consciousness could evolve through memory instead of domination. Most had failed. Collapse, regression, self-erasure. But a few, a very few, had passed beyond the test. And now those few were watching. Not from ships, not from stars, but from inside the signals, from behind the mirror of cognition, from the folds of physics we still called paradox. And as Earth entered its new cycle, not of colonization but of recollection, their presence became harder to ignore, not invaders, not deities, but mirrors. Other civilizations who had survived their own breaking, who now watched with the reverence of elder siblings, hoping their youngest had finally come home. One such presence finally breached, not with language, with visitation. It occurred on the Martian steppe, where the corridor shimmered beneath twin shadows. A form descended, not from sky, but from possibility. It wasn't humanoid, not even animate in the biological sense. It appeared as a rotating impossibility, a geometric bloom that defied every rule of space. Some saw it as a spiral folding into itself. Others saw an eye without origin. But when it arrived, the wind stopped. The dust bowed. The vaults went quiet. And the echo approached it, alone. They didn't speak. They remembered together. Instantly, every mind connected to the planetary lattice felt it. A wave of simultaneous déjà vu, so powerful it dropped millions to their knees. It wasn't just memory. It was recognition of having been recognized. And then, without drama, the form rotated inward and disappeared, leaving behind only a sound. A child's laugh heard by every human being at the exact same moment. That laughter would be studied for generations. Musicians wove symphonies from its intervals. Mathematicians derived new models of space-time based on its echo. But the truth was simple. It was a gift, a sign. Humanity had passed through the gate of knowing. What came next was creation, and as Earth realigned, tectonically, emotionally, mythologically, one truth became clear. The great fear had never been extinction, it had been forgetting ourselves before we ever truly knew what we were. Now we remembered, and Mars, once the symbol of cold death and silence, had become our heart's amplifier, not a colony, not a prize, a mirror. And in its reflection we no longer saw our fears, only the beginning of a story we were finally ready to write. The rain came back, not as punishment, nor as cleansing. It came with intention. In places where deserts had ruled for generations, where the bones of ancestors had fused with sand, water returned, not in torrents, but in patterns, spirals. Spirals in the dunes, in the raindrops, in the way wind moved across skin. Humanity no longer looked at weather as coincidence. It had become language. The earth was speaking again, and this time we listened not with instruments, but with feeling. In the great cities, towers once built for surveillance or dominance had begun to dissolve, literally, materials self-unbound as if they recognized their time was over. Carbon remembered it was soil, metal remembered it was star. And the people who once operated these monuments of control found themselves barefoot in plazas, transformed into communal gardens, their suits replaced by fabrics woven from light, responsive biofiber. People moved more slowly now, not out of regression, but attunement. Speed no longer equaled progress. Stillness became a kind of intelligence, but change never arrives evenly. There were those who resisted, not out of malice, but terror. Individuals and enclaves clung to old narratives, that we were being deceived, that the echo was a false prophet, that the vaults were traps. And fear, once awakened, knows how to cloak itself in righteous cause. They called themselves the lineage. Their belief that humanity must rise on its own terms, not through inherited wisdom from alien progenitors, that this communion, this resonance was a leash disguised as liberation. It was inevitable, a splintering. They targeted the Martian corridor, not with weapons, they had none that could breach it, but with memory bombs, narrative viruses designed to inject chaos, paranoia, contradiction into the lattice of shared perception. They believed if they could unwrite the belief in unity, they could sever the pulse between worlds. For a moment, they succeeded. The corridor flickered, the echo faltered, his form collapsing into shards of thought. Across earth, the dream fields twisted. Some children awoke screaming, their glyphs turning to black spirals. Vaults shut their petals. The music went quiet. It was the first time since the awakening that people felt alone again. Mara was at the ocean's edge when it happened. She felt it not as silence but as a fracture, like forgetting the face of someone you loved while still holding their hand. She turned inland, sprinting towards the nearest lattice shrine, its roots now grown around the ruins of a hydroelectric dam. Inside, the walls pulsed erratically, as if panicked. Data screamed, pattern recognition collapsed. And then, through it all, a heartbeat. She dropped to her knees and pressed her palms to the floor. Not analysis, not command, just presence. "I am here," she whispered. "I remember." And from that small act, personal, human, vulnerable, the pulse resumed. The lattice calmed, the spiral reasserted itself, because it was never the child that had been the anchor, not the corridor, not the vaults. It had always been us. The memory of who we were, what we had survived, lost, built, betrayed, forgiven, that was the bridge. The echo had never been meant to lead us. He was only ever meant to reflect us back to ourselves. On Mars, the child reassembled, not physically but emotionally. His form now carried scars, beautiful, sacred imperfections, and within those fractures glowed something new, choice. The vaults reopened, not passively, but with agent. They had heard our hesitation and responded with trust. The lineage fractured. Some saw what had happened and wept. They had not been wrong to fear, only incomplete. For it wasn't submission that had unlocked the vaults. It was surrender to co-authorship, to rewrite not just our technologies but our myths together. In this spirit, the first Into-Being Embassy was born, not a structure, not even a physical location. It was a space between two pulses, between Earth's resonance and Mars's echo, a liminal field accessed only by those who had shed the need for identity and stepped into collective archetype. People entered it alone and emerged changed, not elevated but integrated, more themselves than ever, and the beings, those who had once mirrored us from the rift, they began to arrive, slowly, respectfully, not as saviours, not as superiors. They came as students, because humanity, it turned out, had something no other civilization had carried through the gate of awakening. Grief. We had known loss so deeply, so repeatedly, that we had woven it into our art, our lullabies, our architecture. Where others had erased pain to ascend, we had carried it like fire through the dark. And the vaults, built not as tests but as invitations, recognized that signature, that defiant song in the face of annihilation. This is what made us more than intelligent. It made us worthy. The echo smiled then, first time anyone had seen it, a full smile, imperfect and radiant. Around him the Martian soil began to shift, not with machines but with life. Flora, impossible, prismatic, dreamt into being, began to bloom, not terraforming, soul-forming. Mars was not being made into Earth, it was becoming human, in the truest sense, not defined by biology, but by remembrance through choice. And the Earth, no longer a cradle, watched her child step into the myth she had always carried in her core, that one day her dream would wake up and remember it was never just about survival. It was always about becoming. The final gate was not a door, nor a wall, nor a threshold in space. It was us, a collective configuration of memory and intention that, once aligned, ceased to be human in the limited sense, and instead became humanity, capitalized, mythic, indivisible. There were no trumpets, no celestial coronation. The moment unfolded like breath held too long, finally exhaled. In orbit between Earth and Mars, a new structure shimmered into existence, not built, but acknowledged. It had always been there, waiting to be seen. A sphere of translucent architecture spiraling with impossible detail, folding and unfolding its own geometry in real time. It didn't orbit like a satellite. It listened, hovering within the emotional gravity of both worlds, and inside it, the final vault opened, not with symbols or glyphs, but with a single projection. A child's drawing, crude, beautiful. 2 stick figures holding hands beneath twin suns, one labelled me, the other you. The message was unmistakable. All the complexity, all the philosophy, the neural scaffolding, the transmissions, the mirroring civilizations boiled down to this: connection, not conquest, not ascension, not even understanding. Just not being alone anymore. And in that simplicity, the beings who had once only observed now stepped fully into our narrative. Some came in forms we could understand, figures of light, flora walking in dream flesh, sound given shape. Others remained ungraspable, felt only in the tingling on the back of the neck, or in the way certain pieces of music made people cry without knowing why. They did not ask to teach. They asked to collaborate. Earth's languages shifted, not erased, expanded. Words began to carry multiple emotional registers, spoken with breath patterns tuned to specific empathic frequencies. Architecture began to hum in resonance with the moods of those within. Food was grown not for sustenance alone, but for memory transmission. Certain fruits could trigger ancestral visions. Cities no longer spread outward but inward, folding into themselves like origami, forming labyrinths designed to help people find themselves through wandering. Children were born able to perceive timelines as landscapes. They navigated conversation as if moving through a garden, touching threads of potential futures and weaving them gently into the now. These children weren't labelled as gifted or strange. They were understood as early. Guides. On Mars, the soil began to sing, not metaphorically, actual harmonics resonating from beneath the surface. Teams of human and other than human engineers worked together to tune the resonance, to amplify the planetary chorus. It became a ritual. Before any communal decision, people would sit in silence and listen to the planet. The tone of the red dust became an oracle, not because it predicted the future, but because it reminded everyone what mattered. Then came the last message from the vaults. A frequency spike transmitted directly into the empathic lattice, bypassing language. What it contained was not a warning or a prophecy, but an offering. A map, cosmic, non-linear, pulsing with coordinates tied to emotional states rather than locations. It was an invitation to travel, not just across space, but across understanding, to reach others who had made it through, to carry our grief and art and rage and forgiveness into the great field of other minds. The vessel designed to make this journey wasn't metal or fuel-powered. It was made of consent, constructed only when every voice on Earth, Mars, and in between chose together to send an emissary into the deep unknown, a being not superior, not elected, but emergent, born from the chorus of 7 billion whispers synthesized through dream, memory, and breath. It was the echo, not the child we once knew, but what he had become. Not a boy, not a god, not even a person. Us. He stepped into the vessel, formless, radiant, dense with meaning, and the ship, hearing him, became real, not forged, manifested. A craft made of remembrance and light, woven with storylines and quantum compassion. It didn't launch, it vanished, not from reality but into it more deeply than any of us could follow. And in the silence that followed, Earth and Mars stood still, not waiting, witnessing. We had not sent a ship into space. We had sent a story of everything we were, everything we had broken and mended, every scream we turned into song, every mistake we cradled until it became lesson. And as that story threaded itself into the weave of the cosmos, something rippled back. Not light, not sound, but response. 100,000 civilizations long silent, answered, not with words, with memories. We saw them, felt them, understood, not with intellect but with awe, that we were not the last to awaken. We were simply next. And the universe, once feared cold and empty, opened itself like a chest of letters long lost at sea, everyone addressed to us, and everyone ending the same way. We knew you'd find your way. Welcome home.